Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Director of Communications for PFLAG National. It's great to have you here this week. And as always, I am joined by my friend and colleague and our fearless learning and inclusion leader, Jean Marie Navetta.
Hello, Liz. How are you?
Doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. I keep thinking that you and I keep getting like 1 week closer to actually seeing each other in person.
I know, we're almost there.
I know, we're so close. But you are going to be coming back and talking to us before the show is over. So thank you for getting things started.
My pleasure.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she and her, or if you speak Spanish, ella. And every single week we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And this week we're coming back to a topic that we have actually covered quite a bit lately, but we can't cover enough, and that is mental health. And I have to admit, it's a little bit ironic that on Tuesday morning, I woke up at 3 o'clock and randomly had a panic attack. And I am a person who deals with anxiety. And it was a little bit of a reminder to me of how this is an ever-present conversation for pretty much all of us, whether we're thinking about it or not. And so we want to get into the discussion, and we have a whole lot of guests today. I have a whole bunch of my friends on the PFLAG staff with some incredible input. But to get the discussion started, I actually want to bring in my team at PFLAG, Jamie Henkel and Mackenzie Hart. Hey, Jamie and Mackenzie.
Hey, how are you?
We're okay. We're all together for once on camera at the same time. So this is kind of a unique moment for us. We don't get to do this a lot, even though we're together all day long, technically. So the article that we're using came from CNBC, and the headline for it was 51% of young Americans say they feel down, depressed, or are hopeless. And here's how advocates are trying to help. And it pointed out to the fact that today is the first ever Mental Health Action Day. And there are a lot of organizations and people looking at this. And just let me give people who didn't have a chance to see our article a couple of the highlights. So the survey found that about of young people that were surveyed, about 68% said they have little energy, 59% aren't sleeping well, 49% are having problems with their appetite, either too much or too little, 28% were having thoughts of self-harm. And this was a really interesting study. And actually, our first question queued up a whole new discussion for us today, because some new data about mental health was released by the Trevor Project today. That was really, it's incredible research, but it's pretty devastating stuff. And in it, we found that, for example, in the looking at the population of young people as a whole, 28% had thought about suicide in the last year. Yet if we just looked at LGBTQ youth, that number goes up to 42%. So, Mackenzie, actually, let's start with you on this first question. So this research, the one that we started with in the original article, actually did not include the experiences of people who are LGBTQ, even though it broke out tons of other demographics. So what do you think is going on there?
Well, one thing that I want to say is that considering that young people are identifying as LGBTQ plus more than any other previous generation, there's almost certainly a good contingent of LGBTQ people polled in this data. So it's very strange to me that it's not isolated, it's not pulled out as a data group. My thinking on that is probably that the sample size was a little too small to be able to pull that out with statistical significance, but it is something that that came up for me that I was thinking the entire time, that, you know, it's very strange to do youth-specific polling and not talk about LGBTQ issues. I will say that it's very interesting that the Trevor Project data came out today. And one thing that I thought was interesting in that data was that 94% of LGBTQ youth said that they have experienced more anxiety and more negative emotions due to politics in the past period of time. And I think that that kind of gives us another potential example that we see that people are less likely, especially in previous generations, to fund LGBTQ-specific research, to focus on LGBTQ-specific issues. And so when we see a political system that isn't going to put that time and energy in, we're also likely going to see a political system that isn't going to pay enough attention to LGBTQ people, and it creates a negative cycle where LGBTQ people are going to feel less well overall, including mental health, especially like we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And Jamie, I know that you're a big nerd when it comes to the research. So what did you see when you started to look at this?
I am, and I think that there is something to be said about sample size and potentially not being able to pull out the data about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, but also they've separated data about like registered voters and non-voters. So if they have a sample size that's big enough to get that information, I don't totally think that is a cogent argument when it comes to this research. I also think that one of the reasons that we don't see information or data about LGBTQ identities included in research is that a lot of people either don't know that they should be asking specific questions about the experiences of people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer, or they don't know how to ask the questions. Jean Marie and Mackenzie and I, we work with a lot of organizations that would like to do some sort of self-ID when it comes to sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And people, they don't know what questions they should be asking, how they should be asking the questions. Sometimes they get it wrong and let's say do something like include trans identities under sexual orientation and get feedback about that sort of keeps them from asking the questions again in the future. So it is not only that people don't know that they should be asking those questions, but also there are concerns of like, I don't know how to effectively ask these questions. And one last thing that I would say, I think that, seeing that Trevor Project data that was released today, I think that there are some challenges with LGBTQ specific data only coming from LGBTQ run and led organizations, because you end up with people who look at a fantastic, a wonderful, a game-changing organization like the Trevor Project doing research about the community that they serve as a part of their mission. And folks look at that research and go, well, of course they're going to find those numbers. They want to continue getting funding for their work. And so I do think that is something we need to help organizations like this group at Harvard that are doing these types of research understand better and move past, so that the only data we have about the LGBTQ community isn't coming from LGBTQ organizations, because it is tied to funding and programs and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And one of the really interesting things that emerged from the original article from the Harvard study was that the researchers made it clear that COVID has exacerbated many of these problems, but it is by no means the standalone reason. In fact, they said that research done in 2018, and this was first-year college students, 35% of them, and this was not just the United States, this was across several countries, 35% of those students reported that they were having some sort of challenge with their mental health at the time. And this predated COVID. It certainly did put us in the middle of some political chaos if you were based here and in a few other places. But this is a significant underlying issue and conversation. I noticed somebody in the chat actually said mental health affects everyone. I like the solution that mental health is healthcare. It is the same thing, and yet we have perpetually and chronically broken it out into something else. So we are always very focused at PFLAG, because we are doers, about what people should do. And so I want to talk about, because you are both in learning, that is what our team does. We are here to teach people how to get to those solutions and how to find ways to change the trends that they are seeing around them. So again, I want to start with you, Mackenzie. I'd love to hear about what are some of those resources that you would recommend to young people who are experiencing maybe depression or extreme isolation, knowing that access can be a challenge for some people, and recognizing that something we talk about is real, which is the stigma of seeking help?
Absolutely. So one initial resource is just finding communities online. There are so many LGBTQ communities online that are more accessible than in the past and can be safer, easier to access, not only just during COVID, but if you are fearing for your safety at home or wherever you are. Being able to connect with people online can be a great step. And then those people can sometimes have better recommendations. I would say looking at online therapy as well can be a great step. it's not always financially accessible, as you said. There are options out there that can be accessible. There are great nonprofit organizations that do offer sliding scale therapy systems where you pay what you can rather than a flat rate, or even some that do some sort of pro bono. So there are different ways that you can go about it. I personally, when it comes to my own mental health, I turn to art, especially music, and reading. When I was in lockdown early on, I ended up buying an e-reader so that I could read again. I love reading, but in my life, the ebbs and flows. Getting an e-reader meant that I was suddenly able to read a lot more, and I was able to learn a lot more through that. And I'm also someone that always goes to music. And then one thing that I did want to mention for marginalized people, especially LGBTQ people in this case, that you are always valid in your identity. I think that a lot of anxiety and a lot of mental health issues arise from feeling that you can't be yourself in certain situations. And one thing that I always say is that safety is the most important. If you are not safe and you are not able to be, expressing yourself as fully as you would like, know that doesn't make you any less valid. Your safety is the most important thing, whether that's physical safety or mental safety. And that's just one thing that I want to emphasize, because I know that you can get really, really caught up in your head when it comes to that, but that your safety, again, is the absolute most important thing.
And that everyone is born perfect. No need to change. I love that. And I love that you thought about sort of the outside resources, but also what kind of solace can you cultivate for yourself in some cases? What comforts you? Jamie, what do you think about resources going, inside of LGBTQ and looking beyond that? Oh, Jamie?
I was reminded to take myself off mute in the private chat that we have too, and I still forgot. So wonderful. I will admit that for this question, I was thinking a lot more sort of institutional resources. But my answer is also, it sort of depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the person. It depends on how I am connected to them. It depends on lots of different things. If somebody came to me and said, I am in crisis, I am thinking about hurting myself right now, the Trevor Project is likely going to be one of my top recommendations, or another suicide prevention hotline or crisis intervention resource. If it is somebody that I know that is a young professional and has just sort of entered the workforce, I might encourage them to see if their company has an employee assistance program. It's something that I know PFLAG offers, and so it might be a tool or a resource that I help them to connect with. If it was somebody who I knew because of how and sort of where they were employed, that they likely had access to health insurance, I might help them to find a psychologist or a therapist or a professional in that way. So it really does depend on what the situation is, who the person is, what our relationship is, the type of resources I'm going to recommend. And when it comes to sort of resources that are specifically for people who are already marginalized, in addition to this stigma around seeking care for mental health, this is a place where I have some LGBTQ specific recommendations, because I've been at PFLAG for 13 years, because we have a partnership with the GLMA, and I know about their physician search tool and those sorts of things. But I am also a white, straight, cisgender woman who is a millennial technically, and has been gainfully employed for a long time. So there are times where I need to admit I don't know what I don't know. I had a friend who I was talking with just on this past Sunday who was sort of expressing to me that they'd like to find a therapist who is also an Asian woman, because that is their lived experience. And, I can help my friend search for that resource, but I need to acknowledge when talking to her, I'd be happy to help you look. I'd be happy to help you do the research to find what you need, but I don't know what I don't know in certain situations.
Yeah, and I think that cultural humility is a really important piece of this, because there are a lot of different ways that this conversation looks different in different spaces. I saw that somebody commented, don't forget that marginalized includes race. It absolutely doesn't. In fact, the original study from Harvard actually talked about how students who were Black or Latinx actually had even worse mental health outcomes than those who were white in this study. And so I think it's about sometimes being willing to help people find the right thing and know that what fits for you may not fit for them. And that's a huge piece of this conversation. So I'm going to ask you our third question, and then we're going to bring in some friends who are going to help us answer it too. So Mackenzie first. Today is the first ever Mental Health Action Day. So in addition to self-care, what commitment are you making, or what are you suggesting to people to help connect people with better services and ways to improve their mental health?
One commitment I'm making is that when I do any political activism or advocacy, to keep mental health and disability, frankly, in mind with anything that I advocate for. For example, if we're talking about making healthcare more accessible, we need to make sure that mental health care is included in that, because it is often left behind, and that it's equitable for people with disabilities as well. I also think that, here we are constantly, I work on this team, I know we are constantly trying to be inclusive and accessible. If we weren't, I would make sure to commit to pushing that. And I think that people across the country and across the world in their workplaces have opportunities to make sure that they are pushing to make sure that their programs and their work is going to be inclusive and accessible, and keeping that in mind consistently across the board, and making sure that mental health and disability don't fall away because they are less discussed, or with mental health less visible.
And I'm quickly peeking into the chat, and that idea of that individual advocacy that you're talking about, somebody was talking about going to their doctor and starting the conversation, and now their forms for intake are now more inclusive. So your individual activism really can change the game. Jamie, what is your commitment today?
So I'm gonna be a little bit brave here and share that my commitment is actually to take a little bit of time and take up some space to understand my own internal biases around mental health and mental health care. I am somebody who, for lots of reasons, prides myself on being sort of fiercely independent in a I don't need no man kind of way. And I think that bleeds over into a lot of the ways that I think about mental health care. And so I want to sit with that knowledge and that understanding and figure out what I can do to move past that barrier to being a better support for myself and for others who might be experiencing difficulties with their mental health.
I love that. And I think that's really cool, because it's cool to know that change starts with you. And then until you've gone through what you need to examine and understand, it's hard to become a really great advocate. And I could say my commitment is keeping talking about this and talking about my own experiences, because the more we talk about it, the less stigma that there is, because it becomes an us thing and not a them thing. Jamie and Mackenzie, you always make me look much smarter than I actually am. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for everything that you're doing. And now I think you are popping out, and we are going to start seeing some of our other colleagues. I will see you both in a few minutes, I'm sure. And so now this is going to be a surprise. We're about to see who's coming. It's Jamie Curtis and Laura Galliano. Hello. Laura,
hello.
You are our newest member of the PFLAG team. So could you do us a favor and introduce yourself, because this is your first time on the show, and then tell us about what your commitment is today.
Sure thing. I can't claim to be newest, though. Greg is our newest member, but my name is Laura Galliano. My pronouns are she, her. I'm new, not newest, to the team as PFLAG Connects Manager, and just really excited to be here and to talk a little bit about mental health, which is so near and dear to my heart. And my commitment is something that is actually easier said than done. And I saw a little bit about this in the comments section. When I check in with friends and loved ones, I ask how they are, but really meaningfully. Like, how are you really? I think we are on autopilot a lot of the time when we check in with our loved ones, and we almost receive the I'm fine or I'm good as truth. And no one's fine right now. We are in the midst of a pandemic, slowly crawling out. And, it's really important that we challenge that I'm fine or I'm good, and check in with folks to make sure that they are getting the resources that they need, and know that there's a safe space to have an honest conversation.
I love that, because that is about spending more time and really asking the questions. Thank you, Laura. And I stand totally corrected. I'm going to have to go beg forgiveness from Greg now. Jamie, what are you doing this year?
Well, I just wanted to echo what Laura was saying, because I was thinking before we came into the session, I wrote down a couple options of things I could say, and that was actually one of them, because I've so appreciated in the last year the people that I've talked to that have said, "How are you?" And I've said, "Oh, I'm fine." And they've said, "No, but really?" And it sort of, makes me stop and think. And so I really appreciate that. I think one of my commitments is to, sort of related to that, check in on people and encourage them to take the time and space they need to take care of themselves, and recognize that some of us sometimes have a gut reaction of, oh no, if someone's taking time for themselves, I won't get something fast enough. Or, when people take vacation, what does that mean? Our project's going to be slower. And I think we need to recognize that as the part of not just doing business, but doing any work, that people are human and they need to be able to step back. And we need to see that of our coworkers, but also people we interface with in any other way, whether it's grocery store workers or our medical professionals, that all of those people are walking through life trying to take care of themselves as well while they're trying to help us. So really just keeping that in mind.
I love that. Going beyond, I'm fine, spending the time and actually really having those conversations. I think it's so important. And I have to say, a year through this on PFLAG staff, I found that we are doing it for each other in many cases. And that feels really nice, but also giving people the space when they need it. So Jamie, Laura, thank you so much. We will see you again very soon, I'm sure. And we're going to bring in two more friends. Jamel is back.
Hi.
Time. Hello, my friends.
Hello.
Hello. Diego, I haven't seen you on for a while, so let's go with you first. So Diego, what is your commitment today?
My commitment is to pay attention to when younger people, which honestly includes everybody in my planet, but when younger people tell me something that's bothered them, when I ask them to actually take the time to follow up with enough questions to see if I can learn something that maybe I can help with. And if not, just listening more strongly is sometimes enough to let people feel and know that they're heard and cared for.
I love that, listening more strongly. I think that is really, what a great way to put it too, especially when you're looking over generational differences, and those differences may not be immediately understood because they're so different from maybe an experience that one of us had. Wisdom as usual, Diego. And Jamel, your commitment today?
My commitment. So I think I'm a little bit different because I am a former mental health practitioner. So I think my set of skills are a little bit different from most folks. I find that I'm usually the connector or the advocate for most people in my life. And that's something that I have committed myself to being because I have the knowledge. So continuing to connect with folks, helping them find resources, helping them navigate the system, and kind of, just being a listening ear for folks, because sometimes people just need someone to listen and to kind of mill things over. For my own mental health, I go to therapy too. Every Sunday at noon, me and my therapist, Christian, sit here and we talk it out. Hey, sometimes therapists need to talk it out too. So investing in my own mental health, making sure that I'm okay. Like when you're on the plane, they say, fix your vest and your mask first before you help everybody else. Fully committed to that.
I really love that, but just for 1 second, could you just sort of talk about that just a tiny bit more? I think the need for helpers to actually get help and what the risks are when that doesn't happen, because that is something I think with your background, you probably know pretty well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you already mentioned like train the trainer. So it's just like, it's the same kind of like mentality, right? So like, frequently the folks that are the mental health practitioners, they're the resources. They're putting in that emotional energy, that intellectual energy into helping people. But what about them? They have lives. They still have to navigate the highways and byways of life. I frequently get the image of like a pitcher, like you're pouring yourself into other people. Who's pouring into you? And so it's absolutely 100% necessary for you to fill up your own pitcher so that you can continue to do the work.
Thank you for saying that, because I do think that there is a challenge. And Diego, I'm going to ask you one more question about this because it just made me think of it. I think there often is a challenge when you are sort of seen as one of the helpers. this expectation that you should have it figured it out yourself, and it can be really tough. Diego, I just want to ask this one thing. You've been in this movement a really long time, and so you've seen things change a lot. Are you seeing more of a focus on self-care? Do you think it is getting better? Do you think days like this one, Mental Health Action Day, are a sign of that? Or do you think we're still having just as much challenge when it comes to the stigma as we used to?
I think that there is still an awful lot of stigma, and it's because we don't talk about it. But I find that the pockets of where people get either self-care or care with others has changed. Back in the early days when, we had F to M support groups, we'd go in a room, and I have an actual anxiety aversion to art, because it used to be used as punishment for me when I was a baby. It was like, you are bad, go in the room and fill in the coloring book. Whereas other people find art as expressive and expansive. And so when we would go into our groups in person, we would find some people were able to enjoy that cutting out of figures and doing that. And I actually would have panic attacks at the mention of art. So I would just walk around the room and admire other people's art. Today, because so many things are not done in person, partially because of COVID, but the other reason is because the internet connects people from such broad geographically dispersed areas that there's less done direct connect. So I think that when people are trying to do self-care, they might be able to more easily find groups who do self-care in the way that they do. But I don't know that it's done to the volume that it should yet.
Thank you. Because I had you here, I was thinking this day is a commemoration. It's the first of hopefully many. And I was thinking, is this a day that we get to look back and say, we've seen these changes? So thank you so much for that perspective. Jamel, Diego, thank you. And I'm sure you will be back soon. Bye. And who do we have coming in now? Seychelle, I knew you were there. And Liz is back with me again. Hello, my friends. Seychelle, tell us what your commitment is today.
My commitment is when my mental health starts to slip, I tend not to do new experiences. So I need something exciting in my life. So I commit to making something new in my week, doing something new. If it's changing the way that I walk around the neighborhood or trying a new meal. And I also try to encourage other people around me to do the same.
I love that, to put yourself into a new space, experience something different, kind of unlodge yourself from wherever you were. I love that. Liz, what is your commitment?
So my commitment is, I do a lot of meetings, much like our PFLAG meetings, that were always in-person meetings. And I know there was a lot of struggle early on with bringing things into virtual space and people feeling like things won't be the same. And it was this very sort of like negative panic around not being. And I think what we're finding is certainly my experience with my own outside of PFLAG meetings is that having virtual meetings has actually made things more accessible. And we're finding more people attending those meetings, where young parents with little kids who can't get childcare, or maybe the space the in-person meeting was not accessible for folks who were physically disabled, or now there's an interpreter who can pop into a meeting, or we have closed captioning where they couldn't join before. And so I've been advocating really hard to not, the minute everything can be back in person again, not to immediately dump those virtual spaces, because it has made our meetings so much more accessible, diverse. We're reaching so many more people. And so I've really been advocating for that in my own meeting spaces, to keep both, because they serve different, really, really important purposes.
I love that. And I saw somebody, I keep trying to peek into the chat, but pay attention to what everybody's saying at the same time. And I saw people talking about connecting with people in your communities and how important that is. And Liz, I think that gives, being virtual gives people the ability to do that. While I've genuinely detested being home and in isolation, the fact that I've interacted with PFLAG chapters across the country whose meetings I could never go to, and I've attended events coming out of places in Florida and on the East Coast and in the Midwest and stuff like that, has been amazing. And I've connected with a lot of new people. And I have to admit, I've had a little anxiety thinking that if we go back, it's not going to be the same and we're not going to have access to those spaces. So I'm really glad that you queued that up. Liz and Seychelle, thank you so much for this, as always, and we will see you again soon. Well, everybody, that brings us to the end of our show once again. Please, please, please remember, if you need help, ask for help. And if you don't want to ask, just go find your help if that's the way you are, if you are one of those fiercely independent people. But help doesn't mean that you're weak. Help means that you are smart. And we want everybody to be here with us for a very long time. So please continue asking for help and accessing it when necessary. Next week, you definitely want to join us. We are going to do a show on Star Trek. So please, nerds, join us. It's going to be a really fun conversation. There may be costumes, I'm just saying. But we're going to wrap up for this week, leaving you the same way that we leave you every week, reminding you to laugh hard. Please to run fast, to laugh hard, and most of all, to be kind, which is the most important thing. And please get vaccinated, and when appropriate, still wear your masks. We're not out of this quite yet. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you next week.